For the last some days, we have seen a very, very pointed smear campaign against the pilots of Air India 171, even as questions mount about what actually caused the plane to go down. The Wall Street Journal, in fact, took the lead in blaming Captain Sumeet Sabharwal, the commander of the aircraft, for cutting fuel supply to the engines. Now, a US-based Indian engineer has used evidence in two widely circulated articles to demolish the pilot did it narrative, proving conclusively, according to him, that there is neither pilot error nor deliberate pilot action. We'll be speaking to him in a moment from now. I'm Barkha Dutt, you're with the Mojo Story. Our focus on the Air India 171 crash and the campaign, the disinformation campaign, many would say, to point fingers without evidence at Captain Sumeet Sabharwal, the commander of the ill-fated aircraft, continues. Pilots and the aviation community, and many Indians indeed, are up in arms, particularly at articles like the one that you see on your screen, the Wall Street Journal, pretty much calling Captain Sabharwal a man with suicide murder mission. Captain Sabharwal has been slandered and smeared, and without any concrete evidence has been blamed for cutting off the fuel control switches based on a rather open-ended preliminary crash investigative report. Now, an engineer based out of the United States of America, Dr. Ranjit John, in two widely circulated articles, really viral articles, has used facts and facts alone to say that he can conclusively show that this was neither pilot error nor any deliberate action by the pilot or the co-pilot of Air India 171. Let's go across now to Dr. Ranjit John, whose articles I'm talking about, literally the most shared articles in the aviation community here in India and in fact across the world. Dr. John is the CEO of Hawkai Data. And even if you're not a tech expert, an aviation expert, I do urge you to read both of these articles. They're on his LinkedIn page. We link to them in the description below, and you'll be able to really understand and read these for yourself. Thank you so much, Dr. John, for doing what you have done. I consider it an act of public service, considering these two pilots no longer alive to defend themselves, the way they have been smeared. And you don't do this emotionally. You use facts to make your argument. And I want to start by actually the central premise of what you establish in your two articles before we get to your specific arguments. You look at what's called the FADEC. Now, a lot of us have heard this term bandied about in the last few days. It stands for Full Authority Digital Engine Controls. And you basically quite simply say, this is like the brain of the aircraft. And the question that you raise is, can the FADEC act on its own without any inputs from the cockpit, from the pilots? And your answer is yes, that the FADEC, in fact, is designed in such a way, in an increasingly automated, computerized aircraft, that it can, in fact, act without any inputs from the cockpit. So before we get into why this is important, do you want to just explain this point?
Sure. The FADEC stands for Full Authority Digital Engine Controls, right? Full authority means I am the CEO, right? The guys who are flying, it's not like, when flying a plane today, like this Dreamliner, it's not flying a plane from 20 years back, right? They were electrical, mechanical, pneumatic. Today, it is all fly-by-wire. It's digital controls that are going to the FADEC. FADEC decides, right? Even when you're taking off, doing a takeoff, go around, you are feeding some parameters into the system, but it is FADEC which is validating it, right? So the initial theories which came where, gear wasn't up, flaps weren't set correctly kind of thing. No, these are, very well-designed planes. These simple mistakes, the job of the FADEC is to protect you from pilot errors, right? And so, really today, if you look at the pilots, it's a VP of operations, a SVP of operations sitting in the cockpit. It is a FADEC, which is a CEO, which is driving all this decisioning. And, it is called algorithmic decision making. It is it has got a whole lot of sensors, which gives it input. Even if you feed it wrong temperature values, it will check with the sensors. It figures out, that I am going to base myself on these sensors.
This this being the backdrop of what you very simply and clearly established, that this is like the CEO of the plane, this is like the brains of the plane, and it can in fact act on its own without pilot input. The second question that you then come to is, therefore, can the FADEC initiate an engine shutdown? And your answer is yes, in some circumstances, and we'll come to those circumstances in just a moment. But if you want to explain this second point, I'm trying to do this very simply, point by point. So
Yeah,
that even
I think, Barkha, what I'll do is I'll
maybe
kind of
get
go
it.
on, I'll go further back, right? Because,
Yeah.
Why did I get into this? Why did I start talking about it? I think we need to understand the Dreamliner, right? A Dreamliner is designed not to fail, right? It's got completely redundant systems. Even if you look at that electric chart of it, right? There are 6 generators on the plane, right? Two on each engine, 2 at the back, the auxiliary power unit, right? You don't have to power it using the ground power unit, right? It can generate enough power. It is tested with, one engine off, it can fly anywhere. It is tested with 5 of these electrical units out, it will still fly, right? That is the kind of redundancy that is built into this plane, right? It costs you $250 million. There's a reason for that, right? You can't bring this plane down because somebody pulled the, fuel switch off, right? It is that smart, right? When you do a landing gear up, the plane knows you are in the air, right? And so it will do it, but it knows if it's on the ground and you pull the gear up kind of thing, it won't do it because it understands all these states, right? So I think the first thing to understand is this is a very advanced plane. You are paying $250 million to $300 million because of all these kind of things, and the FADEC is completely in control in terms of the wind direction, the air density, the temperature. It has all sensors for all these kind of things. So the simple explanation where somebody says, hey, let's say electrical glitch happened, it cannot happen. It has enough redundancy built in that it can handle all those things.
Now, the second thing that is really important, and I think a lot of people do not know, is that with all of this focus on fuel control switches and the allegation by Wall Street Journal and others that Sumeet Sabharwal, because he was the monitoring pilot and not the one flying the plane, actually manually cut off the fuel control switches from run mode to basically off mode. I'm using layperson's language. One of the things that you point out is that the sensor for the fuel cutoff is not on the switch, but on the valve, right?
See, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
See, absolutely. Like if you're a designer, if you're an engineer, right? You never put a sensor on where the action happens. You put the sensor on where the outcome happens, right? Let's say you're in a room, there's a bulb and you have a switch, and you're in another room and you want to manage this remotely where you see if the light is on or off. Right now, if you put the sensor at the switch and the bulb is fused, it is going to give you wrong input, right? Because you say electricity is going, but the bulb is fused. So you would put the sensor next to the light, right? You put a heat sensor or light sensor, right? But again, this is the decisioning, right? Even the sensor can go bad. So you cannot put one sensor, you have to put 2 sensors. But what if one sensor goes bad? And it's like one is saying no, one is on, one is off. So typically you end up putting 3 sensors, right? So that is how this system is built, because every component, there is enough redundancy. Even if something fails, something will pick it up.
Why is it important in the context of the Air India 171 crash that the sensor for the fuel cutoff is not on the switch but on the valve? Because literally all of the allegations against Captain Sumeet Sabharwal have been based on one paraphrased, interpretative cockpit conversation.
Absolutely.
Which you question in your articles.
And, right? I kind of write in that article, because if we look through the preliminary report, it says, and it's all paraphrased, right? It says fuel cutoff valve manually changed from, not manually, I say transition from to cutoff position. And I said, if a pilot were writing this, yes, that is a metaphor they would use because they're in the cockpit and that's what they think it is happening, right? But if a digital engineer were writing it, a systems engineer were writing it, somebody would have said the state of the valve transition from open to close, right? And it's a different way of thinking, right? But the thing, I think, we need to go back, I think, to the beginning of, to June 12th. Right, to understand what is going on, because there are 2 things going on, right? One is the investigation of what happened, right? The data that's coming out for thing. Then there's a media narrative which is happening, which, that is being created in the West, but unfortunately the Indian media has been amplifying the same narrative, and, Indians just take it as a gospel that because somebody wrote it in Wall Street Journal, that has to be the truth. right? And if you just look at Wall Street Journal, right, who's the guy? Some guy, kid out of journalism school, and who's quoting um, unidentified authoritative sources from Bloomberg, right? Who are these authoritative sources? Nobody's mentioning it, right? But if you look at June 12th, let's say, let's go back to June 12th, right? This plane goes down, and this is a Dreamliner, the first time it's gone down kind of thing. And immediately there's a lot of videos and photos that come out, right? And there's this, we call it open source intelligence, right? Everybody's trying to figure out what's going on with the plane. And there's a lot of these YouTubers who come out and say, hey, this is what we saw, this is what we saw. The initial thing was, well, it's the flaps, landing gear. And, I looked at it, I said, I can't believe it, because you put in enough redundancy into this and there is enough smarts, right? But then what happened was, some guy came out and said, hey, the RAT deployed. And the RAT is something called, it's a ram air turbine. It's like a windmill, right? And it is, what it indicates is there's been a catastrophic electrical failure. This comes out. And again, there's a question, because a lot of timelines got hacked, right? Because it is in the underbelly of the plane, in the fuselage. Deploy means it has to come out and extend out. In this thing, in the preliminary report, it says it's been extended out. But extended out doesn't mean it's powering it. It's a windmill that has to now rotate. And the plane is not going at very high speeds. If it had been higher at much higher speed, you would have probably generated power in maybe 6 seconds. This took, I think, 7-8 seconds, right?
Yeah.
But so let's say that happened. I mean, we didn't know the timing, but we know the RAT deployed. And even if you look at the audio of the thing, right? Now there are all these theories as fuel contaminated, this kind of thing, but the audio of the engines would have sounded very different, right? So we ruled out all those theories. And actually one of the things which was not included in the, I don't know why they didn't include in the preliminary report, you can just Google these things and say, hey, AI 171 takeoff, right? And it's been there on Mint, and all these publications have that. And you will clearly see it's a video where it's taking off. And the view gets cut off at a point where there's some kind of an observation deck. But as soon as it takes off, you will see a cloud of smoke. And as it goes up, there's a bigger cloud of smoke, right? And in this, while this open source, source intelligence was going on, people said, hey, the RAT deployed, but I can see some smoke. So, everybody was going in that direction. Suddenly somebody started putting this thing, hey, that's not smoke, that could be sand. Right. And this is not Dubai airport where there are, sandstorms or anything like that. Right. It took off from the runway. There's no way that could be sand. And you can check it. You just have to look at it, a good quality thing. You will see the smoke. Right. But then, the news started coming out that, hey, this is the one I'm talking about. Right. Just look at the, to the left of this building as soon as it takes off.
Yeah. And then there it is. Yeah.
Right. So you have the smoke, right? And then the news that started coming on us, they said, hey, we found the flight recorder. But suddenly the news said, hey, we can't read any data out of it.
Yeah.
Right. And then, there's silence for a while.
Can I hold you before you come to the flight recorder? It's very important to talk about the RAT, right? Now, if we just go back for a moment to the report's inclusion of the third CCTV image of when the RAT was deployed, if we can bring that image up. You say in your articles that basically the RAT was deployed hundreds of milliseconds before this image was taken, because for the RAT to be out, it would take 5 to 6 seconds to actually be set into motion, or
no. So for it to come out, so let's say a failure happens, the RAT comes out, it takes about 800 milliseconds.
I see.
To get into the fully extended position.
Okay,
and at that time, it's not generating any power. So the windmill has come out. It is not starting to rotate, but it's not generating power.
So when I say here, quoting from you, the RAT deployed hundreds of milliseconds before this image was taken. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct.
Okay. Now the operative part, which is one of the key ways in which you demolish the pilot error theory. If the RAT, you say, that the facts show you, the timestamps of what is available shows you that the RAT was deployed before the fuel was cut off. The Western media narrative has been the fuel switches transition from run to cut off, fuel supply stops to the engine, therefore the RAT deploys. You're saying this chronology is wrong.
Absolutely.
The RAT deploys before the fuel switches were cut off, pointing to the fact that there was a catastrophic failure well before any movement of the valves of the fuel
Absolutely.
switches. Yes?
Absolutely. Right?
Am I
Yeah.
saying it correctly?
You
Can
are
you
absolutely correct.
explain this? Can you please
So,
explain this?
so what happens is, so this photo was taken, right?
Yeah.
Now, when you take CCTV camera photos, there are typically a timestamp on it. But the problem with the timestamp is, it has got its own clock. And a lot of times, I don't know if you have a digital clock at home, if the
Yeah.
power goes up, it resets to 12 o'clock, right?
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
can never believe the time on that CCTV camera. So I think a lot of people complain saying, oh, AIB should have put that, the time on the, but that's a mistake. That's a wrong time, right? It doesn't hold up in court because, the CCTV clock is different from the plane's clock. The plane's clock is the one which is recording the time in the flight data recorder, right? So what you have to do is when you do this temporal, causality, you have to make sure that you are not using the clock of the CCTV camera. You have to use the reference of the plane's clock, right? So that is why what we had to do was we had to triangulate and say, what is that in the background? That's a domestic airport, right? It took me a while to figure out, it's Ahmedabad airport is like a L. This is the international airport. This is a domestic airport, right? And because it's this angle, we could figure out, we saw this tower over here to the right, we could figure out exactly where that camera should have been.
There's the image from your article. If
Absolutely.
You want to
and so we marked the 39, 40, 41, 42 seconds. And 39 is as soon as it, takes off. And, looking at the camera direction towards the domestic airport, you can clearly see it is taken between the 39th and 40th second. Right. So what we've done is we've transferred the clock time, the actual time, to the reference of the plane's clock. Right. And so, people blaming that AIB should have put a timestamp on it. No, that would have been a mistake. Right. You should never do that because that's two different clocks. Right. And even if it had a timestamp, even if it's just off a few seconds, you'll get it wrong.
You're saying that just a sort of even 2 second difference, 1 second difference can make your entire difference to your understanding of what happened.
Absolutely right, because the moment you put the timestamp in, it's a public thing, right? It's public perception more than that, right? The scientist understands. The public is not going to understand the moment you put a timestamp on it.
That's
right. You should never do this. You should always go back to one clock.
But I have a question. Per how the preliminary report has been read, the fuel switches transition 3 seconds after liftoff, right? After takeoff.
42, yes.
3 seconds.
3 seconds. Liftoff was 39, 42 was transition. Yes.
But then you're saying the rat is deployed before 3 seconds after takeoff. Because you are saying...
No. I'm saying the rat deployed between the 39th and the 40th second.
Got it.
Right?
Got it.
So 41, 42, the valve move, shut off. 43, the second engine's valve shut off.
Right. So basically... the operative part is this. The rat is deployed before the fuel valve has moved. It is not the other way around. It is not that someone has moved the fuel switch and therefore the rat is deployed. The rat is deployed and then the rest has come into motion. Now, the question is this. You therefore say, given this, there are all indications of a catastrophic electrical failure.
Absolutely, right? And the thing was, and you have to go through this, right? Because there's a huge amount of misdirection going on, right?
Yeah.
Because if you look at it, look, we were clearly that the rat had deployed, there was smoke, then suddenly the black box couldn't be retrieved. Then suddenly there's a black box, we can retrieve data. But that's what happened was, so essentially you have to understand, ICAO requirements, right?
Yeah.
In ICAO requirements, you have to put a preliminary report in 30 days. But there is no requirement to make it public, right? There's absolutely no obligation for AIB to make it public, right? They have to submit it to maybe ICAO and, some few people see it. But, it was supposed, the 30th day was, I think, July 12th. About 2-3 days before, there was a leak. A British, a media house, somebody started carrying it. And Captain Steve, I've been following Captain Steve and all these guys. He started picking it up and said, listen, there's been information is coming out. It is all about the fuel control switches. Right. And, if it's about and they started putting images of the fuel control switches in the plane. And suddenly this whole thing became, if it's a physical thing, it has to be moved. Right. And so then I said, look, this sounds very odd. It doesn't make any sense because we are talking something very different 2 weeks back. Suddenly this thing has completely changed. And then I said, I need to look at it, right? And I think, and there's a lot of debate in India saying, why did the AIB put it in the middle of the night? There was a reason, because they had no reason to put it public, but there's a huge narrative being created that, it is the fuel control switches. Somebody put it out. They had no obligation to put it out, right? And so I saw, it was Friday, my time. I was waiting for it. It was out there. I started reading it. And then I started looking at things, and, by Saturday, Indian papers had come out, and the narrative was completely different. They had introduced words into it which went in the document, right? The document clearly says, why did he cut off? It got changed to, why did you cut off? Why did you cut off fuel? There's a whole lot of things which went in the report start coming out. And even things like, if you look at the RAT, it just says RAT started powering at 47, started powering the hydraulics, right?
Yeah.
But that got changed to RAT deployed and started powering the hydraulics, right? And the deployed is a very specific term, right? Deployed means it got extended out. It's not powering, right? So there's a whole lot of words which got added to this. So Saturday I looked at it and I started sending mail to, and I even commented on Captain Steve saying, hey, this is what you got the timeline completely wrong. This is the right, this thing, right? And he gets, I think, 20,000 comments, something like that. I'm sure he didn't see it. But there's a bunch of guys who commented on my thing saying, hey, what you are saying is the only thing which makes sense. And there's one guy who said, listen, you need to push this out because this is the only thing which makes sense. And I sent to other people also, hey, and everybody came back, no, media is saying completely different. Your timeline is wrong, right? And I'm saying, did you even read the report? And none of these have read the report, right? Because it is media which said. So then...
And it's so unfortunate, I didn't know Captain Sumeet Sabharwal or Captain Clive Kundar, but just the idea of somebody not alive, to speak for themselves, being smeared without evidence. And, and Captain Steve, I was very enraged. I wrote a lot against him because I thought he made a little bit of a mockery. It was a little bit of a TikTok moment. But, to just come back to your articles, and I'm so glad you pushed that out. And in your 2 articles, you say that you can show for a fact that both pilots acted professionally and as trained. They were the best of the best. And of course, the most important thing that you establish is that the deployment of the RAT indicates a catastrophic electrical failure, and that the RAT actually deploys before the fuel cutoff valve moves.
Absolutely.
Now the second operative part of both of your articles, right, is a possible lithium-ion battery dimension to this.
Absolutely.
And you base this on what happens to the 2 black boxes. So if we can just bring those images up.
Absolutely.
Now here you explain, you look at the tail black box, the one at the rear, and you say that neither gasoline fire nor the impact of the crash can explain the damage to this. And you believe that there has been a major thermal runway incident. Translated loosely basically means, and please correct me if I'm using the wrong language, that there was intense fire, and these lithium batteries, the Dreamliners had problems with them before, could have exploded, causing this kind of damage to the tail black box. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. So, and on Saturday, I was just, I knew all these theories that were being provided wasn't true. It wasn't correct, right? But I didn't have, a formal proof, right? And then I came back and read it, and I saw this image. And I said, this is the only thing I need, right? And in my articles, I've shown the black boxes which have been retrieved from the Ethiopian plane crash, the 737 MAX, the Lion Air crash, right? And you have to understand these black boxes are rated for 1,000 degrees Celsius heat, right? For 30 minutes to 1 hour. It is rated for, impact of 3,400 G-forces, right? This plane was just 400 feet up, right? So there's not much impact that's going to happen, right? Damage that's going to happen, right? And if you look at the right black box, and this is the enclosure, right? This is just, jet fuel fire. It can easily handle it, right? And,
and sorry, this is typically what the other retrieved black boxes from the crashes look like.
Absolutely, right? And the Ethiopian crashed on the land, the Lion Air went into Java Sea, but, you should see something like that because it is built to survive, right? Now it is
Correct.
made of titanium, it is made of steel, it has got multiple layers of protection, and even the memory card inside has something called a crash protection module, right?
Yeah,
Which
yeah,
is so, I mean, so there is multiple layers of security on this. And this is what I was missing, right? Why did they fail to? And so I can understand exactly what happened to AIB, which is, they retrieved this first. They tried to retrieve the data, they couldn't, they were disappointed, and then suddenly, a few days later, they found the other thing. They found that they could retrieve data from there. Everybody
yeah.
forgot the black box, right? I
Hmm.
mean, the rear black box, and it got. I'm sure it was sitting in some storage or something like that.
Yeah,
But the
yeah,
question to ask is, what could have caused this damage? Because this is, steel got. It's not even melted; it got vaporized, right?
yeah,
Titanium got vaporized, and that's why I went
yeah.
through that thing. What are the vaporized? And I grew up in Bokaro Steel City, right? We have a steel plant there, and I grew up steel. I was seeing liquid steel, right?
Yeah,
That is
yeah,
1500 degrees, right? But to vaporize it, you have to get to at least 2500 degrees Celsius, right? And the
yeah,
only heat that can generate that kind of heat is a lithium ion battery, right? And because one thing falls, and there's a lot of things which have gone wrong, right? The temperature of Ahmedabad was high, but if you look at them, the key thing, I mean, if you want to go to the root cause, but we can go to that later. But if you look at
yeah.
this, you know you know this is the smoking gun, right? And what I call the fuel switches, that is the red herring.
Right. So you believe, and please could you talk a little bit about the history of the lithium batteries when it comes to the Dreamliner?
So if you look at it, the Dreamliner was the first thing to install the lithium battery, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Earlier it was, I mean, you had nickel cadmium and other things, but the problem with the nickel cadmium also all heavier, right? And so when you build these things on planes, you want to get lighter elements, right? And so you can get more energy, faster charging kind of thing, and in a smaller container, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
it's lighter, right? And it's got all these advantages, right?
yeah,
But and it's like, it takes years to get, I mean, it's all chemistry, right? The stability depends on heat, a whole lot of things. And if you've seen the thing is, most in India, I think Tesla is just coming in kind of thing. But I live in an area where there's a lot of Teslas, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
if you've seen a Tesla in a thermal runway crash, you know it is not like a gasoline, what ends up. You will just see about half a car left, right? And it's the same thing whether it's VinFast or any of these EVs, right?
yeah,
But the difference is over time. And if you look at the Dreamliner, and we don't need to get into this, but what happened was Boeing changed a whole lot of their supply chain providers, right? And this battery comes from a company called Yuasa in Japan. They went through whole things, and they came and modeled this thing, and they said, one failure in maybe 10 million flight hours, something like that. But after all their tests, I think within 200 hours, I think it was the Japan Airlines which saw smoke in the thing, and
yeah,
another
yeah,
maybe 2000 hours later kind of thing was another ANA flight, I think. And
yeah,
then they had to ground the Dreamliners, right? And they did a whole lot of testing on it, and it became a congressional hearing, all these kind of thing. And if you look, I put two references on that, and one is a very good article which talks about this whole thing, written by an engineer. And it talks about this lady called Deborah Hertzman. She was the NTSB chairwoman, one of the top persons in this field. And she clearly outlined saying, look, listen, you have to avoid this
yeah,
thermal runaway in the design itself. So you can't put a thing where that it could cause thermal runaways, right? They did, the Boeing said, look, we have done 200,000 hours of engineering research on it, and then we can't figure out how it happens, right? So what they did is they made better venting, stronger containers and all that kind of thing, and the FAA kind of green lighted it. So there
yeah.
were some shortcuts taken, but it remained on that. And the thing is that when the thermal runaway happens, neither the container nor it is the heat that is generated is too much,
Hmm.
right? And the only way you can explain the rear black box in that shape is because a thermal runaway happened.
So you actually then say, given these two, three different facts that you connect, you believe that the focus of investigators should be on the APU, the auxiliary power unit, and the lithium ion batteries.
Absolutely, right? So the thing is, you have to uh, put in two more data points, right?
Yeah,
Now, if you look at the preliminary report, the engines were shut off, but it was also restarted. right? And when
Yes.
it got restarted, engine 1 restarted, engine 2 did not. It kept sputtering, right? And so what happens when you have a car and you keep stuttering, right? Your 12-volt battery is below
Yeah.
voltage. What it
Yeah.
means is the generator 2 on the auxiliary power unit had got damaged, so the engine 2 didn't light up,
Hmm.
right? But you go,
I think there's the article you were talking about. The NTSB cites a thermal runway in Boeing 787 battery fire. This is the past reference that you were making to these
yeah, that's
incidents
Japan
having
airline.
happened
Yeah, yeah.
before.
Uh-huh.
Yes, yes,
Uh-huh.
yes, yes. Go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry. Yeah.
And and to understand what went on, and there is a and there was a guy on a flight from Delhi to Ahmedabad, the same plane, right? um, who put out a video saying, look, it was really hot inside the cabin, I've never been in something like this, kind of thing. And what does that mean? It means one of the APUs is down, because the APU is powering the AC in the cabin, right? And
Hmm.
it may not be down, but it may have been compromised, right?
Hmm.
And so when you one of the APUs, the generators is down, it is the jet
Yeah.
fuel generator. What it
Yeah.
means is it's going to use the lithium ion battery as a backup, right?
Yeah.
Because everything has a backup. And then
Yeah.
if the lithium ion battery, and it's a combination of factors, it was hot, in Ahmedabad, this had APU2 had compromised the generator on APU, and this lithium battery is being pulled at the power is being sucked out at a rate where it's not should have been, right? It
Mhm.
was not designed for a water kind of thing, right? And
Yeah.
it was a thermal runaway. And to look at the whole thing, right? Okay, so let's say a thermal runaway happens, but that is not what brought down the plane, right? Because you have
Hmm.
the whole thing, and the black box clearly says there was a thermal event that happened, and the smoke,
Hmm.
everything points to that, right? But the question is, why did the engine shut off, right? Because engines are powered, right? So
Yeah.
when engines are moving, it is generating power, right?
So let me come to what you say about this, and then you can
Mhm.
explain it. So now you say, and please again correct me because I'm like a student here.
Mhm.
Basically, we believe that there is the generator of the APU may have been compromised. There is some sort of eruption, explosion of the lithium ion batteries. There is a electrical failure. The rat deploys. Now you come back to the FADEC where we started. And the
Absolutely.
FADEC, you say, in the absence of getting engine health data, could have initiated a shutdown because
See,
that's what it's
absolutely,
built
right?
to do.
So
Yeah,
when you say, look, you do the ICAO things, right? And ICAO says,
yeah,
look, let's have a disaster, but let's not never have that similar kind of disaster ever again, right?
yeah,
What does that
yeah.
mean, right? So let's say a plane goes down. Let's say the Lion Air went down. People ignored it. People said, hey, it's pilot fault. Then the Ethiopian went down, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And the Ethiopian stood up and said, no,
yeah,
we don't want to blame our pilots. We think there's something else. It was a new plane, right?
yeah.
And so the report went to ICAO, and it got fixed. It was a simple programming error that was built into the
MCAS,
737 Max,
the MCAS.
exactly,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
MCAS, right? Now, so any kind of error that happens, and that's why I described the software process, right? The use case comes in, right? And so I go back to the British Midlands crash, where a pilot mistakenly shuts off the wrong engine. So one engine was damaged. In his panic, he shut off the good engine, and the plane crashed, right?
Yeah.
So what happens is, when this happens, and you have this FADEC, and it knows, and it can respond faster than the pilot, right? So you put in code saying, listen, if I have an engine that's gone down, then I can shut the right engine down. I don't have to wait for pilot input. So this code goes in, right? And it works. Many cases where a pilot thing, it automatically shuts it off, kind of thing, and it balances with everything's great, right? And even when the German wings, right? And the thing, if you come back to the murder suicide kind of thing, and the two planes have gone down like that. The Malaysian 370, where a
Yeah.
guy practiced and took it out, and there is no survivors in that. And the German wings, right, which crashed in the Alps, where the pilot waited for the pilot to go out, and the co-pilot just shut the cabin door and crashed it, right? And the thing to remember is, in all those cases, there's absolutely no survivors, right? Whereas here, what
There
you
is
have to
one
remember is,
survivor.
there is a survivor, and that is what you have to give credit to these pilots, right? The pilots did their best, even when they had nothing going on, where they had no input in the cockpit. They did their best at the time, and one guy got saved, right? But
Yeah.
so essentially, what happens, even when German wings went down, right? The same thing, right? You have a flight plan. FADEC knows you're completely off the flight plan, right? At that point, it can prompt and say, look, I'm not going to do this till both the pilot and the co-pilot, both authorize me to do this, right? You can put in these checks and these checks get put in, but this is a closed system. Nobody knows about it, right? And that is the problem, right? And this, which we call algorithmic decision making, right? And that is the word we need to start using, where there are a lot of things which are happening in the software that pilots don't know. And it's the same thing if you look at a Tesla is like a computer on wheels, right? Now so right now what is going on in India is like a Tesla has come in, Tesla crashes, and you bring in a guy who's driven 100,000 miles on a Maruti Swift, right? And that is the problem. The Maruti Swift guy cannot reason the behavior of a Tesla, right?
So the only thing left in this chronology that you have reconstructed is the cockpit conversation, which you believe has been paraphrased in media, where the third person has been changed to, in a sense, the first person, right? Why did he cut off is how the preliminary report.
No, it was said. He said, why did he cut off? Even I would have said, right? Because the engine cut off. He had no idea what happened. I would respond, say, why did he cut off, right? That's a natural way for me to say. But I think what happened was when they took this thing, they thought they would have all the clues in the voice cockpit recorder, and the intent was never to make this public. The 30-day was just to give it kind of thing. Somebody did it hastily, and it's not a great job, right? Because you'll use abbreviations, acronyms, kind of thing. You give me an index, right? Don't expect me to Google and try to figure out what all these things mean. But so it was hurriedly done. There was no intent to make it public, but because there was a leak and there were being narratives being set up, they put it out.
Can I in the end just recap how you explain this to us? You basically start by looking at the chronology to say that the rat is deployed before the fuel valves, before the fuel control switches move, which means the very chronology being picked up by Western media is wrong, which says that first it's the fuel control switches that are moved and then the rat deploys. You say this is the other way around. Right?
No, even you take that argument, right? You shut all the fuel switch off and you're saying the rat will deploy. I mean, has Boeing said that will happen, right? Because the fuel switch off is always moved to cut off on land, right? You don't see a rat deploying, right? Correct. So you can't presume this thing will happen, right? You have to give me evidence to say that,
That's right. And the second point that you make is that the nature of the damage to the tail black box, the DFDR, indicates that this is not gasoline or from the impact, because you can see the DFDRs from other crashes, and this indicates an intense fire, which you suspect is a thermal runway incident, which is basically internal, which is the lithium ion batteries, and not an external fire. Absolutely. All of this means that the FADEC could have stopped receiving data on the engine health, and the FADEC itself could have shut down the engines, and the pilots then work and scramble to retrieve and relight these engines. And we know from the report that one, in fact, relights.
No. Let me make it very clear, right? So when the engines are moving, it is generating power.
Yes.
So the cockpit is prioritized, right? The cockpit, they have no idea what is going on.
I see, because the cockpit has power.
Cockpit has power because the engine is moving, cockpit has power. They feel everything is okay, right? But if you look at that survivor's account, right? He said, as soon as it took off, I heard a loud bang. I heard flickering, right? What does flickering mean? It's shifted to a backup, right? So, but then what happens is, there's an electrical failure, rat drops, right? It takes 6-7 seconds to retrieve power on those circuits, right? The cockpit has power, right?
Yeah.
But in that 6-7 seconds, the FADEC is not getting engine health data, right? So at that time, again, it has to take a decision, right? Again, what I'm saying is a software error, right? Because what you did was, if the FADEC had done no action, what would have happened is somebody, it would have climbed, the engines are on, it would have climbed, somebody reported saying, hey, there's a loud bang, they would have just circled back and landed. There would have been no problem on this flight because 787s are built for this. You can have a lithium ion runway fire, it gets reported, they'll just circle back and land. It is like exactly what Japan Airlines and ANA and all these guys did, right? Here, what happened is it took an algorithmic, what they call an uncommanded, which the Ethiopian guys call an uncommanded action, right? Where it says, And why it takes it? Because it thinks that engine is compromised, but it's not compromised. Engines are fine, but because that data network which was feeding me this data from the sensor saying engine health is good, it is a programming mistake which says, oh, I'm not hearing data, which means the engine must be bad. Let me shut this down, right? And there's a FADEC instance for engine 1, there's a FADEC instance for engine 2. Each is taking this independently, right? Now, they take this independently, I shut it down, right? But then about 7 seconds later, at 47, the rat restores power, right? So when it restores power, the data network connects and it starts getting engine health data. And they say, engine say, I'm fine. So FedEx says, okay,
So then in your opinion, the fuel control switches were never moved physically at all?
Never. That's why I said you have to talk about the valve, because sensors, if you're a Boeing engineer, and they are very good Boeing engineers, if you're designing these systems and you're charging me 250 million for a plane, you will never put it on the switch. You will put, and the reason things have changed is because FedEx also can do everything that a pilot can do, right? In fact, the FedEx can do more in terms of, because any input that you go through a FedEx, the FedEx first validates it. So it will not let you make simple mistakes at all.
Yeah, this is very, very clear and very easy to understand. And like I said, it's an act of public service, I believe, at this time, Dr. John. I want to, in the end, just look a little bit about, what you urge the investigators to do. You say borrow something from how the Ethiopian regulators responded.
No, that was more of,
an emotional, an emotional feeling.
Not even an emotional thing. I mean, look, India, between Air India and Indigo, is buying hundreds of planes. Right? Yes. You have the cards, right? The cards are with you. It is not with Boeing or it's not with Airbus, right? That is number one thing that you have to understand. Number two is, I put 3 things, right? Number 2 is, there are all these uncommanded actions that I need to know about, right? If you do a nose down automatically on a 737 MAX, right?
Yeah.
Because, and you didn't communicate that to pilots, that's a problem, right? So I need to know when all these things can fail, right? So that is number 1. 2, flight data recorders haven't been upgraded in decades, right? When maybe it was the 70s, 80s, somebody's put it down, you're adding more events. But today what has happened is the FedEx comes in between, because there are a lot of actions that can be initiated by FedEx. So why don't you add a field which clearly says initiated by FedEx or initiated by cockpit, right? If you had that field, we won't be debating this at all, right? Saying, did it come from the cockpit or did it come here kind of thing, right? So that's number 2. And number 3, you put a black box which is rated for 1000 degrees Celsius right next to a battery which can generate 5000 degrees Celsius. And that is a completely wrong design, right? You cannot, and just because you enclose in more steel, it is not going to block off that 5000 degrees Celsius, right? So there are a lot of things that the AIB can, this is an opportunity for AIB. They need to come out and make a very, very strong statement saying, look, the facts are there. This is your smoking gun, the black box. Right?
Yeah.
And I had to be very careful because, that Friday, it was Saturday, I knew in my head this was that kind of thing. But I couldn't say things without having, real evidence. And that's why I said Exhibit A, Exhibit B, Exhibit C. Exhibit A was a rat. Exhibit B was the gasoline, the jet fuel fire, the forward one. And the Exhibit C was this thing kind of thing, right? And I'm saying, listen, it's not me. It's just science, right? Anybody who looks in the report itself, and I didn't even add the video with the smoke in it because AIB hadn't added it, because I didn't want to get burned by saying, oh, well, that's fake or something like that, right? If they didn't add it, I don't want to add it, right? But, I am just saying, look at these 3 things, you will come to the, your thing. And Exhibit C, which is the black box, that is your smoking gun. The flight switches are a red herring. Ignore it. It is a distraction that is being created by the West. Avoid, don't look towards that, because there's a lot of money going into, creating those narratives.
I think this is literally the bottom line. The fuel control switches conversation is the smoke is the red herring, and the smoking gun is the rear black box in particular, which shows all evidence of an internal lithium-ion fire, a thermal runway incident. And the second important point is that the rat is deployed before there has been any transition of the fuel control valves. And I think that is extremely important. Ranjit John, this has been an absolutely critically important conversation. Once again, Dr. Ranjit John, the CEO of Hawkai Data, has 2 critically important articles for anybody interested in what happened on Air India 171, which I think is all Indians and in fact the entire world, because this impacts everybody. should be reading his 2 articles, which are up on his LinkedIn, and they're also linked in our description below. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your time. And overall, above everything else, your clarity. Thank you, Ranjit.
Thank you, Barkha. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Take care. See you soon.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.